Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live webinar. We have a good bunch signed up to this webinar. We'll see how many can make it online and how many will be watching the recording afterwards. But hey, I'm glad to be here with you. And just to start off, just want to say, feel free to put a message in the chat if you have something on your mind anytime during the presentation. And even now at the start, it would actually be nice to hear, where are you coming from when considering buying a home in Finland? Are you already a homeowner? Are you already living in your own home, maybe considering buying? Just drop a few lines in the chat. It's always nicer to know who I'm talking to. So today we have a webinar which I've actually been waiting myself a lot to have. This is something that I've been planning for quite some time now. And because there is a lot going on in the housing market, it has actually been a bit of a challenge to put this package together, but I'm glad to be here now and be able to present some of the things, what I see, which are happening in the housing market in Finland right now. And before we get started, just want to say a few words about myself so you know who you're listening to, because not all of you are familiar with me. So my name is Sakari Tolppanen, and I'm really a researcher, a real estate investor, an entrepreneur, and an educator. Those are the different hats that I wear, and I really like combining those. So I really like looking at the housing market, doing research, doing investments based on that, but also educating other people. And the reason why I really started educating others is that a lot of my friends were noticing that, hey, this guy's making pretty good deals. He must be doing something right. And they started asking me for advice on different issues, and I helped them out. And the more people started asking me, the more I thought, hey, it seems like people really need help in this field. And so I started consulting people, and today I've helped hundreds of people already by now. And of course, glad to be of help through this webinar as well to you, and maybe in the future through some of my other services. Now, the real reason why I do this is to help other people, as I mentioned. And I do think that there's quite a lot of interesting things going on in the world right now. And so I thought to put this webinar together to be of help, to maybe help you navigate the housing market. Or if you are a homeowner, as some of you seem to be, then maybe consider what are some of the steps you might want to take. So I have online courses. I do apartment analysis for those who are considering buying their first home. And of course, one-on-one consultation for people also who are in the need of that. So just a little bit about the goal of today. What is the focus here? So of course, the real focus is to present different scenarios of what the future may hold. And of course, that really comes with a caveat, because no one knows what the future holds. But we will be doing a little bit of predicting the future, and mainly through understanding different risks and really understanding inflation, where it comes from, and what could be the factors that really start pressing inflation down, because understanding that will also have an impact on housing prices. And when we're talking about inflation, we need to talk also about, can we afford everything what's going on? And of course, this is a very personal question. It depends on your finances. But as a society, where are we at? What could the future look like from that perspective? And towards the end, I'm going to present 3 different scenarios on what I think is happening in the markets, or could happen in the next short term and also in a midterm, and then give you some concrete action points. And as mentioned, feel free to comment, ask questions, and towards the end, we will have time to go through some of those. So you can drop those in the chat at any point you feel best. All right, so a few words about predicting the future. Well, first of all, I should say that no one really can predict the future. And I think this graph here is quite telling. For some of you, this might tell something. For others, it won't. So first of all, here we have the Euribor interest rates and how those have changed over time. And that's the blue line. And okay, interest rates have gone down. We probably all know that. except of course this doesn't have the story of the next or the past few months. But the thing I really want to point out here is these dotted lines. And these dotted lines say what the market or experts, economists, what were they expecting to happen to interest rates. And we really see that the trend is here, that when interest rates were going down rapidly in 2008, 2009, the majority of economists thought, okay, well, this is just temporary. Things are going to go back to normal. They're going to start rising quite rapidly afterwards. But that never really happened. And the more time passed by, we see that these estimates of future rises become more conservative, I would say. They're not expecting interest rates to rise 1-2% anymore. It's maybe 0.5% or so forth. And when we look at just the end of 21, we see that a lot of the estimates were still thinking that interest rates are going to remain very low for very long, actually all the way until 24 or whatnot. And if you look at it, they were actually estimating that interest rates would be below 0% still by 24. So I think this is very important for us to understand when we think about estimating the future, trying to predict it, but also when we're reading the news and we hear different experts say, oh, this and that's going to happen, we really don't know. And that goes for me as well. I really don't know. And I just want to point that out. But what I do really want to do here is to help you understand a little bit of the different factors that might be at play, which will have an effect on where things go. Some of that, and actually a lot of that, is political. And that's also why it's very hard at the moment to make predictions into the future. But just to sort of strengthen this story, I just want to show that at the start of this year, there were estimates that inflation or these interest rates would go to max 1%. This is just a few months ago. Now, when interest rates did gradually, or quite rapidly actually, when they did start to rise just at the start of this year, then we see that all of a sudden these estimates were much different. And this, I want to point out, was before the war in Ukraine, these estimates that we see on the right. So just a small shift in the markets really changed the shift of what analysts were saying what will happen in the future. But even then, they were predicting interest rates to be way below 2%, even by 2025. Now, personally, I think one of the banks or companies that has made one of the best analysis or estimates is Nordea. Just a few months ago during the summer, they were saying that interest rates would probably go above 2% already by the end of the year, and maybe towards 3% by next year. Now, even they were too conservative. We know that currently the Euribor rate is already at 2.5%, and really no one knows what it will be by the end of the year or by next year. There's different estimates, and there's different reasons for these different estimates. An economist that I appreciate from Nordea actually is Jan von Gerich. Don't know how to pronounce his name, but he on Twitter gives quite a lot of info on where he sees the markets going. And this was just a tweet he had a few days ago. And I like this tweet because he shows these different scenarios, these different possibilities of what might happen in the future. First of all, this blue line here shows what the current markets are predicting where interest rates will go in the future. So we're talking about around 3% in the long term. Now, there are also reasons to assume that interest rates could actually go higher than that. And that's this green line here. And really, these different scenarios come down to different political scenarios and what will happen in politics, what will happen around the world, in finance. And so because of that, it's hard to predict. There are also scenarios, as he points out, where the interest rates will go below 2% and even below 1%. And this is something that we will dive a little bit deeper into during this webinar. What are some of these factors? What are some of the things you might want to pay attention to if you're trying to get a fair estimate of where interest rates would be going, but also a fair estimate of where maybe house prices will be going if you're a home buyer? So just to point out, there is a lot of uncertainty. There is a lot of risks in the market right now. And anything I say don't hold it against me. I am not giving financial advice. I'm just saying how I see the market right now. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about inflation. So we probably know that inflation really has an effect on home prices and, of course, interest rates. But we really need to distinguish between two types of inflation. So we have inflation, which is caused by an increase in demand. And this inflation we saw really after COVID and during COVID. People were flying more after COVID lockdowns. So flight tickets went up. They were driving their cars more. So gas prices went up. And people were spending more on their home to make it nice. So a lot of the wood, for instance, was selling for much higher and so forth. So that was causing inflation because of an increase in demand. But then we also have inflation because of a decrease in supply. And we really saw this after the war started in Ukraine. So first of all, of course, from that, we're talking about an energy crisis because all of a sudden, all of the energy from Russia is more or less off of the markets. And also, we have seen a decrease in production in goods in some places like China, where because of COVID, they've shut down factories. So all that product, which typically would be coming to the markets, it's not there. So there's more people competing for those products on the market, and that then also increases inflation. So these are some of the factors at play, and really, central banks, of course, they try to decrease inflation from its current highs because it's not good for the economy in the long run. And when inflation is caused by an increase in demand, central banks have a better opportunity to do something about it. But when it's a decrease in supply, their hands are more or less tied. And so this is what the chart looks like when we look at inflation. So inflation has really been skyrocketing. We haven't seen anything like this for the past 20 years or even 40 years. So inflation at above 8% in Europe is historically very high. And of course, the central banks are getting nervous about this. Now, of course, as individuals, we are thinking, can we afford this? Can we afford these high prices? How is this going to play out personally? And how is this going to play out for us as a society? So before going into an answer to this question, I just want to show a few charts regarding the housing market, which are also at play when it comes to affordability. This first chart here shows how house prices have, how much debt homes have had in different parts of Finland since 2020, or since 2002, sorry. So the orange line is this center area, so Helsinki, Espoo, Vantaa. And we see that the amount of debt that people have in these areas has decreased to over double what it was just 20 years ago. Now, of course, also, we need to understand that wages have went up and whatnot, but they have not went up close to as much as what the amount of debt has went up. We do also see this increase in other parts of Finland, even though not as quite dramatic as in the capital region. So point number one is people are more indebted than what they were, let's say, 20 years ago. Now, the second thing that we can look at here is this red line. It shows how much debt households have compared to their income per year. And so here we see on the left that historically it's been maybe around 70%, but now we're close to maybe 130, 140% of debt that we have per household compared to their income. And this blue line here then tells how much those interests payments have been for them. And what we really see from this blue line is that even if households now have more debt than what they used to have, they're still paying less interest. Of course, both euro-wise, but also because they're making more of an income. So this interest hasn't really been a problem for them. And that is one reason why house prices has really went up in the past 10, 20 years. And if you don't know how much house prices have went up, I think this chart on the left really shows it. So when we look at the historical trend, the green line shows the capital area, and this isn't even including 2021, where house prices actually went up quite much compared to the previous years. So house prices have really increased in the capital region, whereas in the rest of Finland, house prices have actually went down somewhat compared to where they were at their peak around 2008, 2010. So we really have a mixed story when it comes to house prices. And of course, that will also really affect how these different scenarios will play out for different people. But it's not just the capital region where prices have went up. This chart on the right shows also how prices have increased in Tampere, in Turku, in Oulu, and places like that. And especially during the past 2 years, Tampere and Turku have been places where prices have went up quite a bit. So now, if we start thinking about the fact that there's a lot of people in Finland, when they're buying a home, they're taking out a loan of around, let's say, 250,000 euros. So let's say in Helsinki, if you're buying a home, over half of you will be paying around 300,000 euros or more for that home. That's just what the statistics are like. Now, of course, if you're living in other parts of Finland, house prices will be cheaper. But then again, maybe you have a detached home. So again, the price range might be at around 300,000 euros. So just as an example, let's assume that someone has a loan of 250,000 euros. And what that really means for their monthly expenses, if we just look at these increase in interest rates, is, well, before all of these increases in interest rates, they were pretty much just paying for the margin on their interest. So maybe around 0.7%. Now, after we've had this increase in interest rates, already today, if you go to the bank, you will have a Euribor of around 2.5%, plus you will be paying a margin of around 0.7, 0.8%. So the total interest rate for you will already be over 3%. So just compare that to a year ago or the start of the year. For that person taking out that loan, their monthly expenses just to cover those loan payments will have gone up already by 300 euros a month, over 3,500 euros a year. So that money is away from something else, obviously. Now, I asked the question, can we afford it? And I would say, well, 300 euros a month, some people can, maybe some people can't. And so it is, of course, very individual on how affordability or how affordable housing currently is for people. Now, the sad thing is, this is only the interest rates, but of course, the price of everything else has went up as well. So I recently wrote a blog article where I really broke down all of these expenses to find out how much is the increase in price for different types of households. So here we see that for the average household of, let's say, a family of 4 with 250,000 euros as a loan, their total monthly payments will go up over 500 euros a month. Now, for some with a smaller loan, with a smaller family, of course, it's going to be less. But the point is, 500 euros a month for many people is a lot of money. And that inevitably, in my opinion, will cause people to try to save here and there and reconsider their different purchase decisions. And of course, we might think, okay, well, maybe this is just temporary. The situation in the world, it might just last for half year, a year. Maybe after that, things will be getting better. And if that is so, then of course, savings will help out people. So people who are distressed financially, they most likely will have some savings, so they can use up some of those savings to cover some of these additional costs. Now, in Finland, the median amount of savings and investments per household is 15,000 euros. Now, of course, this means that there's some people who have just been saving for their home. Maybe they've saved 20, 30,000 euros, and that's why that, of course, will increase the median. But there's also a lot of people who don't have practically any savings. There was just an article on the news saying that 25% of the people do not have a buffer of 1 month of expenses. So you're spending 3,000 euro a month. They don't even have 3,000 euros in savings. So now if these prices go up 500 euros a month, that means in just a few months, they're going to be done with their savings. And it's a very small amount of people also who have a buffer for, let's say, 3 to 4 months. So the saving amount that people have is not very dramatic. So we can't really count on those savings coming to the rescue if the situation with high inflation, high interest rates persists for a longer time. So what will this mean when it comes to house prices in the short term and in the mid and long term? This is where it gets speculative. And of course, I do want to open up my ideas to this, and feel free to also share your own ideas and contradict with me. That is what this is about, to get you thinking. And also, as I said, this is not investment advice. I can be completely wrong and whatnot. But how I see things is that in the short term, there's going to be less money for people to spend on extra stuff. People will be going out to eat less. They will be traveling less. They will be spending less on recreational activities and whatnot. And that, of course, will have an effect on the economy. Restaurants, first of all, they will have higher fees because of electric bills, but they might also have less customers. So that can be bad for customers, or bad for the companies, which can also mean that it's bad for their employees because they might be laid off. People, of course, when they're needing to save, they will also put off some big investments such as renovations. And this will, of course, also have an impact on the economy. And because of these different forces, my view is that this will also be bad for real estate investors as well as homeowners in the short term. And because of this, I see there's a potential for home prices to decrease. Now, in the mid to long term, things may be different. When inflation persists for a longer time, often wages also increase because people start protesting, they start demanding higher wages, and those wages will gradually increase. And that will, of course, help some of the pain. Now, the problem with that can be that actually when people's wages go up, the inflation will actually continue to persist. And that's not really what central banks want. In the mid to long term, if inflation persists, it also means that cash is trash, meaning that the purchasing power of your money will decrease. And for a prolonged period of time, you don't want to be in cash. You might want to be invested in something else like real assets, such as real estate. So it's really a mixed story. And as we will go through in the scenarios, it really depends on how long these different phases take for us to say how home prices may develop in the next 2, 3, 5 years. But just before going to the scenarios, just a few things that really are at force or at work at the same time. So first of all, when there's a time of inflation, building costs go up. And this, of course, means that eventually home prices will go up as well, because to build a new home, you need to put in more money. And of course, assuming that a town is growing, someone will need that home. And so if the price of the new home goes up, that tends to also ripple to all of the other homes as well. The price of renovations in building complexes go up. So also those who live in older buildings will need to pay more for those renovations. And rents go up as well because investors want to collect a bigger rent to cover the expenses. And eventually also wages do tend to go up. So these are the positive sides or causing prices to increase. Now, the things that may cause prices to decrease is that there is a high starting price in home prices, as we saw from the chart I presented earlier. So when starting from a high plateau, it's harder to continue climbing higher, whereas if we would have a low base that we would be starting from. The increase in interest rates has been very dramatic and rapid, and that, of course, will put back a lot of people's purchasing decisions. And of course, then there's costs of necessities increasing, so people have less money to spend on housing. So that will also have a negative effect. So at this point, the take-home message is that in the short term, if you're renting a home, you might actually end up being the winner because, well, rents typically don't go up as much as all of these other expenses are going up for homeowners. But one thing you do want to do is check your rental contract to see how much your landlord can raise your annual rents. For some of you, the contract may say that it's just 3% flat rate, whereas for the others, it might say that it's inflation plus 3%. So all of a sudden, your rent might go up 10% a year. So really, you want to check your rental contract and see what that looks like. If there's just a 3% that the landlord can increase your rent, hey, you might as well live there for a while, unless you're very certain that you want to buy a home now. But at least you will be fairly well off just living there as well. Now, really going into these different scenarios and also explaining a little bit why I think it's important to consider different scenarios. So when we talk about increases or decreases in home prices, it really comes down to inflation, and that comes down to central bank policy and interest rates. And so those of you who follow economic news, you may have heard that central bank policy has been tightening, meaning that they have been raising their interest rates. And that, of course, ripples down to the interest rates that you will be getting from the bank. And the reason why central banks are doing this is that it's a way for them to fight inflation. Because when they increase rates, people are spending less. And when people spend less, also the demand for those certain products isn't as tight. So the price of those products comes down eventually. Now, there is also the opportunity that governments will give out subsidies. And of course, this is already happening to some extent. But in the scenario one, we assume that governments will not give out too much subsidies. And actually, just yesterday, there was a news article from the head of the European Central Bank. And sorry, the title is in Finnish, but what she's saying is that the ECB, so the Central Bank of Europe, will be continuing raising interest rates. And she says that governments should not give too much of these subsidies to people because that will put the whole euro area at risk. So this scenario one is tied to what Lagarde was saying of what will happen. Now, scenario two is that central banks continue increasing these rates, but at the same time, governments start giving out more and more subsidies. And the thing with these subsidies is that they actually increase inflation because people are not decreasing their consumption as much as what would be hoped for. And just, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, we saw that in Finland, this type of subsidies are given out, but they're maybe not as generous as in some other countries, such as the UK. So also in the UK, I think just on the weekend, the pound, so their currency really got depreciated because they decided to give a lot of tax cuts to people to make it more feasible for them to pay for energy bills and so forth. But because their currency then decreased, that actually means that it will increase inflation because a lot of the products that they need to buy will be sold to them in US dollars. And so when they have a weak pound, those products will cost more for them, increasing their inflation. And because of this, there were different entities saying that the Bank of England should actually call an emergency meeting and increase these rates so they would be sort of countering what the government was doing. Now, so far, the Bank of England decided not to have an emergency meeting and not to increase the interest rates more. But there is these two forces that are really colliding in this scenario two. Now, the scenario three would be then that central banks reverse policy. And this could especially happen if we see a strong recession and central banks see that, okay, they need to ease policy to make the economy running again. So this is sort of in line with what someone from Swedbank, so the Swedish central bank, was saying, that he thinks that there's a currency war actually going on and central banks should not tighten policy the way they are doing right now. So for all of these different scenarios, there is a narrative. And of course, for us, it's hard to say which one will play out. And so as home buyers, we sort of need to be aware of these different factors and maybe consider how they play out by reading the news. But when it comes to home prices, how I see things is that if this scenario one plays out, that will have a negative impact on home prices because interest rates will go up. People will not be able to afford such high prices in homes, or they would not want to because it would be just easier and better for them to live on rent. Scenario two would be sort of a mix between scenario one and three. So it really depends how those forces play out between the central bank and government subsidies. And scenario three would be something that would increase house prices because if central banks ease policy, that would mean that inflation would increase. And also it could mean that those interest rates would not increase. So typically that type of scenario would have an increase in home prices or in any real asset for that matter. So how do I see things? Which of these scenarios do I see playing out? Well, I decided to put some percentages on these. Of course, this is just me throwing out numbers, but it gives some indication on which one I see most likely. So I think scenario one is the most likely out of these three. I gave it a 50% chance of happening. Scenario two, a 30% chance, and scenario three, a 20% chance at this point. So do notice that this is the short-term view that I have currently. And based on these, I think that there's a downside risk. It doesn't mean that home prices will go down, but I do see more risk to the downside than to the upside. Now, if we look at the midterm or the long term, the story really changes because if we continue scenario one for long, it's going to bring pain to the economy. And I think central banks and governments will want to or need to change their policy because there's just going to be too much pain put on the consumer. So in the midterm, I think scenario one has a 10% chance, scenario two has a 40% chance, and scenario three, I find the most likely as a 50% chance of happening. So meaning central banks will need to reverse policy, ease financial conditions. So from this perspective, I see an upside risk or upside potential in the markets. So now, what is the short-term, midterm, how they might play out? Well, if we put these alongside each other, we might see home prices go down first, and then at some point they will go up. And if you are a homeowner, I think what this means for you is if you know you're going to own for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, don't stress it. As long as you don't go bust, you're able to cover all your expenses, you will be fine. But if you are in the situation that you might need to sell in 1 or 2 years because you're moving out of country or so forth, then one thing to consider is, do you want to do that now? And again, of course, will the scenario play out in the first place? Now, if you are a home buyer and you don't have a home yet, you might consider, should you be buying now or maybe waiting for some time? There might be some good opportunities down the road. The big question here, though, is that we really don't know how long these scenarios will play out for, because as mentioned, it's really about politics. And so it could be that this scenario one drags out for a long time, and only after a year or two, we see the scenario three play out. But it can also be that scenario one plays out for just a month or two, and the pain is too hard on the market. So central banks will change policy already quite soon, which will really ease stress on maybe house prices not going down as much, or maybe not even really at all, or just a few percentage, and then they might continue on their path upwards. So this is really the challenge. We don't know these time spans. It's really about politics, not so much about market fundamentals, because the interest rate has been shifted because of central bank policy and so forth. And that has really been the case since 2008, when central banks started to intervene with the markets more and more. So just a few action points for you then. Now, I think the best place to start is to make a cost benefit analysis. Now, of course, all of you have different backgrounds. Some of you already own a home, and some of you are considering buying a home. And of course, the need of the size of the home is also different for different people. There's different financial situations. Some of you have a lot saved up, whereas some of you don't have so much saved up. So really do a cost benefit analysis. Examine and calculate what would it mean if you live on rent for another 1 or 2 years, if that's what you're already doing, compared to then if you would buy a home now and pay the mortgage, and who knows, it could be 3.5%, it could be 2%, but it might as well also be 6%. We really don't know. So you need to do the math and consider these different options for you. And I would suggest that also when you're looking at home listings, don't only look at the current price of the maintenance fees, but you can assume that that price is going to increase 15, 20% in the next year or two. That's at least what a lot of analysts and experts are saying. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just as an example, you have rent for an apartment that you're living in or interested in, and you're paying 970 euros rent. So if you would buy that place, maybe it would cost you 200,000 euros. You would need a loan of 150,000 euros. So after that, the maintenance fees and the interest fees, so the money you will never see coming back to you, it's going to be around 700 euros. So from that perspective, you would still be paying off some of that mortgage, almost 300 euros of it. So that's money going to the savings. And if you do that for a long period of time, of course, eventually you will have paid off that home. And if you're going to do it for the next 10, 15, 20 years, living in that same home, regardless of what happens in the markets, you will be fine as long as those interest rates don't kill you if they go up even more. The action point number 2 that I would say is now could be a good time to cut spending and save. I think in these hard times that are ahead, you may need that extra cash just to pay off your utility bills and whatnot. But also, if you have some extra that you're able to save, it can bring good investment opportunities, whether in real estate or in some other investment vehicles that you might be interested in. However, the caveat here is that it is good to remember that in the long term, cash is trash if inflation persists. So having that money, having those savings in your bank account 5, 10 years from now, their purchasing power will be very low compared to what it is now if inflation persists. So just something to keep in mind. Now, action point 3 is really to educate yourself. And I think this is always important, but now it's more important than ever. And the reason why I highlight this really is that when you know what you're doing, you know what you're doing. And so, for instance, when looking at apartments right now, there's some apartments where the apartment can be in very bad condition. There's a lot of renovations coming up, and you don't really even know the price of those renovations, but that home might be selling for a similar price as something that has all the renovations done. So you don't have to worry about those for the next 10 years, let's say. Also, when you educate yourself in the real estate market, you can make some really good deals. And just as an example of that, I recently bought a new apartment where the housing complex had saved up so much money that they were able to pay for the piping renovation completely. So I bought the place for below market value because this was information that was not available on the listing. But because I read the financial statements, I understood what the apartment building complex is about. I noticed that, hey, they actually have a lot of money on their bank account. So I got practically the piping renovation for free. So this is the power of educating yourself. And of course, educating yourself can be challenging and it takes a lot of work. And that's also something that I've wanted to help people with. And so if you're interested, as I did mention, I do have an online course, which is really a step-by-step guide to understand really all the main details you need to know as a home buyer. So of course, that's going to boost your confidence because you're going to know what you're doing. You're going to understand the renovation costs, the hidden costs. You're going to know what are the things you want to look in when looking for a home. So what are the things in the documents that you should really pay attention to? And I'm just going to quickly show you what the course looks like. So when you come to my website, you will find a link to this. So this is the online course. There's some description about me. And this course really consists of 6 different modules, learning modules. The first one is getting ready to buy. And I have a few videos here which are on free preview, so you can watch those, check them out, see if they fit you. And of course, a lot of other stuff as well, just preparing you for that purchasing decision. Then there's really getting you to understand what is it that you're buying? What are your responsibilities? What are the things you should pay attention to when looking at listings? How to compare asking price and market price and so forth. Renovations, key topic here, talking about the expenses of those, the duration, what are the things you need to consider. And yeah, just even going to renovating your apartment, how much might that cost? What are the cost benefits of either buying something you need to renovate or then buying something that has already been renovated? Module 4 is about examining an apartment. So giving concrete examples where I analyze apartments, I analyze different documents of the apartment and make that as a learning experience. So you also get a better idea of what are the things you should pay attention to. Of course, we also talk about banking, finances, and also how you can negotiate with the bank, try to get a good deal on your mortgage rate. And of course, then what are the steps when you actually decide to buy? You put in an offer. What are the things you should pay attention to in the term sheet? And if there's some tricks and tips that you can do when negotiating and so forth. So this is what the course is about. And I think for many of you, it might be something that you want to consider. So you're free to consider that. You can find out more information on that on my webpage. And I do also have a lifetime 100% satisfaction guarantee on it. So if you do the purchase and you decide, okay, this isn't for me, no questions asked, you will get your money back. But I'm confident that that's a very rare case. The thing that I say is that if you're not able to save the amount you're putting into the course when you're buying a home, then I haven't completed my job. I think that when you put in the money for the course, you're going to save that back 5 times, 10 times over when you're actually purchasing your home. And of course, if some of you online have done the course or attended one of my seminars on similar topics, you're free to write in the chat on your experience. I don't know if there's any such people online, but if there is, maybe that will give an idea for others also on how you experience the course. But of course, there's also people on my website who have given their experience, so you can read those. Now, a special offer for all of you who are online right now. So if you do think that this course could be for you, you can get it now for a €50 decrease. So I'm fighting inflation, causing deflation, reducing the price, but this is just for a 1-week offer. Then it's going to go back to normal. And probably at the end of the year, it's going to go up even more because of inflation and whatnot. But anyways, now it's available for $249 for 1 week. And the coupon for that is you type in save 50. When purchasing the course, it will give you the opportunity to type in the coupon. And of course, I do have other services as well. If you need one-on-one consultation, or if you have an apartment that you're interested in, contact me and I can help you analyze it to make sure that you don't make any big mistakes. And you can contact me through emailing me. But now there's time for questions. So if you have any questions, I'm also going to start reading the chat to see what are the things that have come up. So yeah, some of you already own a home, some are looking for a semi-detached home. And as someone points out, renovation costs can cause some people to sell homes, and that's a very good point. Some of the renovation costs for building complex renovations like piping, roofing, and whatnot, those prices have actually gone up 10, 15, 20% within the past year or so. So that will bring an extra financial strain to a lot of people. Those renovations, of course, already before were something that were dreaded, partially because of their finances, but also partially because of the um, living comfort effect that they have. So Kutebera is asking, does the course consider buying an omakotitalo, so a detached home? So this particular course is about buying an apartment. Now, of course, there are a lot of same principles that go for both, but the examples given in the course are about a detached home, or sorry, apartment building. Now, I have gotten several people asking me, is there a course coming for an omakotitalo? And so if that's something you would want to vote for, feel free to comment in the comment section, and that will give me further signal that maybe I should build a course like that. So Nikhil was asking, what are these costs, rahoitusvastike? So I'm not 100% sure if I understand the question. Feel free to elaborate on that. But typically, when looking at a home, there's going to be rahoitusvastike and there's going to be hoitovastike. When you look at the listing, the hoitovastike means that it's the maintenance fee. So the maintenance fee goes to pay for heating, electrics in the building complex, cleaning the yard and stuff like that. Whereas then if the building complex has a loan that they're paying off, let's say they've had a roofing renovation a year or two ago and they took a loan for that. So you as an owner will have to pay off that loan or your share of that loan, and that will be marked as the rahoitusvastike. All right. How are you feeling about buying a home? Do you feel confident, nervous, deciding to wait and see? And how about those who already own a home? Anyone consider selling because of this situation, what's going on right now? Or are you just going to hold for a few years to come? Please feel free to share your thoughts. All right. So it seems like there's no more comments or no more questions coming here. So yeah, so Nikhil is pointing out some of his observations. Some apartments do have high maintenance fees, and I think those maintenance fees will be coming up in the next year or so. And a lot of the increase in the costs are not yet seen in the maintenance fees because building complexes, they typically have one meeting a year, which is like a general meeting. And in those meetings, they decide what the maintenance fees will be for the next year. And typically, in most building complexes, those next meetings will be next spring. So, sometime in April, May, around then. And I think then we will start seeing an increase in these maintenance fees. Now, of course, with some building complexes, their budget is already tight and they will have to collect extra hoitovastike from the owners because they're not able to cover the fees. So that's something I think we will see and hear more of in the decent future or in the next months and half a year and so forth. All right. Hey, I want to thank you for participating in this webinar. I hope you found it useful. My main intention, again, was to educate and help you understand and navigate what's going on in the markets right now. And I really hope I could be of help to you. And if you do find that this workshop was helpful or webinar was helpful to you, or it could be helpful for a friend, please do send a link to your friend so that they can watch the recording of this. And also make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I used to have a channel in Finnish, but now I've started to produce some content in English as well. So I have a few videos online already, and there will be more coming. So subscribe, and you will be able to get a hold of that content and really see my latest updates. And well, since this webinar is on YouTube, it will be easy for you to press that subscribe button. Anyways, I want to thank you all for participating, and I hope to hear from you in the future. Have a great day.